Hello, friends. Happy 2026. I haven't been on here to say hello to you guys and let you know what's going on since sometime in, I think, November of last year. And I've caught up. I have moved through a really restful December. I had 2 weeks off, more or less, near Christmas time. I didn't teach a lot. I taught a few of my online classes and I really let myself mellow out, and I didn't put any pressure on myself to make a video until I felt ready to wrap up my 2025 of reading, which I'm really happy to tell you guys was a successful year. And I give my thanks and gratitude to some of you booktubers out there who really encouraged and inspired me to get my reading game back on. So if you're new here, welcome. For your first time, my name's Holly, and this is my little potpourri of a channel where I end up just kind of talking about whatever it is that's going on in my life, but mostly I focus on books that I'm reading. And it's kind of a booktube channel, but it's also just kind of a whatever, catch up, how's my life going kind of thing, and an opportunity to create kind of a video diary here. And I haven't quite nailed my niche yet, but I don't know that that matters. I'm really trying to just have a good time and get used to being in front of the camera, and also kind of learn how to be more articulate about the books I'm reading and, just in general. So today, I'm going to go over the books that I read that were nonfiction books last year. In total, though, I read 22 books last year, which for me is really good. And I'm pleased with that amount. And I remind myself that, I have a whole nother there's a lot more to my life other than reading. And although I really have had to work at building my attention span back up and my comprehension skills, a lot of it is just, I teach yoga. I'm a yoga teacher and I teach classes from my home. Actually, this is my yoga studio, kind of a little bit more full of stuff now than it is when I teach. But I teach from right here, and I also teach some in-person classes, and I do what I like to call field trip yoga classes where I find some places out in nature for my group to come meet me. So my life's relatively full otherwise, and sometimes I don't have time to read, or it's just not the thing I want to do when I have free time. So I'm really proud, though, that I built my reading back up this past year. It's kind of been my little rebel yell for everything that's going on in the world, and sort of my ability to, to resist being sucked into my phone all the time. I love reading real books. And anyway, before I make a really long video, which I don't intend for this video to be really long, I will kind of stop my free flow stream of consciousness there, and I will tell you about the nonfiction books I read this year. And two of the books that I read that were nonfiction I don't have anymore. One I gave to my mom. That is a book called Grayson, and I actually, on my other one of my other phones, I pulled up some pictures of the books that I don't have today to make this video. So let me show you a really funky picture of the cover of the book Grayson. It's by Lynne Cox, and I'll just start there. So that book was recommended through a reading review that Paul Mars did, and if you haven't checked out Paul's channel, I totally encourage you to do so. I will link his channel, or him anyway, down in the description of this video. And he read that book and loved it. And so I thought, oh, I'm going to read that book. And I got it by almost all my books on Thrift Books, and I got it there. And after reading this story, an enchanting story, I discovered that the author is also a UC Santa Barbara alumni like myself. And so that was kind of a cool tie-in. The book takes place in Southern California in the water, in the ocean. And I ended up liking the book so much and thinking so much of it that I sent it to my mom, and my mom loved it. So that is the bigger triumph of this book, is sending my mom something that she enjoyed so much. She called it a life-changing book. So that's her review. My review is pretty equally stellar, although I don't think I liked it as much as Mom did. I'm going to read you a little blurb from the book. Don't believe in interspecies communication. Grayson author Lynne Cox's moving memoir. Oops, it got really small. Moving memoir. well, now, a moving memoir about a lost baby whale she encountered when she was 17 just might change your mind. Um, it was the dark early morning. 17-year-old Lynne Cox was swimming her last half mile back to the pier after a long workout when she became aware that something was swimming with her. The ocean was charged with energy, as if a squall was moving in, and whatever it was felt large enough to be a white shark coursing beneath her body. So the what was coursing beneath her turns out to be a baby whale who has been separated from his mom. And the rest of the book is about her working with the Coast Guard and friends of hers on the pier to locate where mom was and try to reunite baby with mother. And it was a really moving story. It was also for me a really like anxiety ridden story because I'm not, oh my gosh, the idea of swimming out in the ocean is terrifying to me. That is not my scene. And so coupled with the fact that it was cold in the book when she was writing this story about swimming in the ocean so early in the morning, trying to stay in the water long enough to get mom and baby back together again. I found myself cold, and I found myself holding my breath during the reading of this book. So, but it's not a real long book. I think it was just over 100 pages, something like that. Really inspiring, lovely book. Really nice to read a book about nature because I will admit I'm kind of more of an indoor girl. So I really enjoyed that. But like I said, the bigger triumph was having my mom read it and love it. So that was one of the nonfiction books. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I ended up reading 7 nonfiction books. I have 6 of them, no, 5 of them here. The other one that I read that I don't have anymore it was called The Beautiful Fall by Alicia Drake. I think I pulled up a picture of that one too. And The Beautiful Fall, this is the cover that I had, the book that I had to leave at my mom's house. If you were on this channel in the fall, I went to go visit my family and I was gone for a week. And when I was coming back, I did not have room to repack that book, which I finished while I was there. So The Beautiful Fall by Alicia Drake, the overview is Paris in the 70s was running at full tilt. A new order was coming into view amid hedonism, ambition, and outrageous decadence. This was a fashion revolution, the beginning of fashion as rock star spectacle, and the world went wild for it. So the book is centered around the rise of Karl Lagerfeld and Yves Saint Laurent in the 70s, and it has a whole cast of real life characters like Jerry Hall and Grace Jones and all these, fashion models of the time. I am really drawn to stories like that, and I loved this one. I myself am not a terribly fashionable person. I might be if I lived a different life, but I live a very casual life, and like I said, I'm a yoga instructor, so more often than not, I find myself in leggings and t-shirts and sweatshirts. Um, so, The Beautiful Fall was part of a little collection of books I read over the summer. So, I started reading The Beautiful Fall probably in August, and I didn't finish it till, like I said, I was with my family in November on a visit. So, it took me a while to read it. If you've been here before, you know that I have books that I read in the morning, or I choose a book or two for the morning and a book or two for evening reading. And The Beautiful Fall ended up to be my morning read, and those tend to go slower for me. I usually only read just a few pages in the morning. So it took me a while to get through that book. I think it was like about 350 pages. And I read it in conjunction with other books, or there was like this string of books that I read, maybe starting in the spring, and they were all centered in France. It took place in France, most of them in Paris. And I ended up getting even more wildly interested. I've always been interested in French culture. I just felt immersed in it between The Beautiful Fall and a few other books that I'll tell you guys about in some upcoming videos. And I decided to join Duolingo and start studying French. And I'm loving it. I've still been doing it. I think I started that in August. And so I think this speaks to part of what I'm really enjoying about the journey of becoming a reader again, is I forgot how it opens you up to other interests and other things that will catch you and inspire you, and getting so immersed in French culture and the language and I just loved it. And I'm so happy that I'm studying French now. I actually was a Spanish major in college and got my degree in Spanish a long time ago. However many years ago 1993 was, that's when I graduated. And learning French has opened up that channel, that the place in me that loves learning language. And so I'm really happy to say that The Beautiful Fall was one of those books that did it for me. So I think I showed you a picture of the cover of the book that I had. So that was the second of the nonfiction books, although that wasn't the second in the year. Now I'm going to kind of try to go backwards through the books that I read last year. Or no, you know what? I'm just going to do them in the order that I have them stacked here. That's just easier. So so those were the two of the seven of the books of the 22 total that I read in 2025. The book that I finished the year with was Meditations for Mortals. Meditations for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. This was a total impulse buy that I purchased in the grocery store when I was visiting my mom. Part of the reason I couldn't bring The Beautiful Fall back was because I bought a few books while I was there. And this was a great read. You're only meant to read one chapter a day for, I think it's 4 weeks is what it's, yeah, 4 weeks to embrace your limitations and make time for what counts. I really liked this book. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but that was kind of the point of the book, I think. It was that we are mortals. We do have limitations. We are going to fall into the same little traps that, we've always fallen into. But to kind of reimagine those as opportunities and to open up some motivation and just being a regular old person and taking that motivation into looking at things differently so you can maybe find a new spark to keep you going. And it was a good way to finish the year because I was tired by the end of last year. I did a lot in the last 8 weeks of the year, and I pushed myself and I was out there with people a lot, which isn't easy for me as an introvert. And by the second week in December, maybe the third week, I was done. But I managed to still read a paragraph, a chapter a morning. I think I probably skipped some mornings here and there, but for the most part, this took me to the end of the year. So I've read a lot of self-improvement books in my time, and I like the simpler ones, and I really did enjoy this one. So if you're looking for a book that you can just read little snippets of to keep yourself motivated, because that's kind of what I'm realizing about self-help books, is that you're probably not going to read a lot that's going to be super new to you, but you're going to read things that re-inspire you and that re-remind you of some tips and tricks on how to get the most out of yourself, I guess. So this was a good book to finish the year on. I do have a friend in mind to give this to, though, so this won't be staying in my library. This was one of the earliest books I read earlier last year. What's it called? At the Existentialist Cafe by Sarah Bakewell. This book was recommended or reviewed by Jim at Great Books, Big Ideas. Hey, Jim. And I loved this book. And I have talked about this book quite a lot in other videos that I did last year. So if you saw any of those, you know how much I love this book. I loved the biographical nature of this book. I loved learning about existentialists. I had never read hardly anything about existentialism or these authors and philosophers, and so it was all very new to me. There was some really great vocabulary words in this book that I learned for the first time or brushed up on. I made all these tabs in the book, which I really haven't gone back through, and that's not something I normally do. So I really was so opened up by this book and really felt like my intellectual nature, such as it is, kind of leapt forward. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading this. It is biographical, and it does talk about some of the more major, of course, the major existentialists of their time. Actually, this book was part of that French sort of channel that got opened up because a lot of this took place in France. I just loved it. I really did. It wasn't it wasn't a hard read, but it did take me a while to get through. This was another morning read. I tend to, although it's kind of shifting lately, I tend to read books that are a little bit more learned in the morning and more like fiction, enjoyable stories in the evening. I totally enjoyed this, but it was a little bit more, intellectual, a little bit more I often use my made up word learny, like a learny book. And this was definitely one of them. If you have never read about the existentialist, or you know very little about existentialism like I did, and I'm no expert now after reading one book, but this is a great place to start if you're at all interested. And if you like biographies, you'll like this book. And it's really easy to read in that it's not overly intellectual and it doesn't speak above you. It's a very readable book, and I enjoyed the journey of getting through it. It took me a little while to get through it because, like I said, my morning reads tend to go slower, but I really did like it. All right, then this book was another one that was recommended, reviewed by Paul Mars, and it was kind of a happy little coincidence because he recommended it, and I love David Bowie. So, of course, Ziggyology, A Brief History of Ziggy Stardust by Simon Goddard looked really interesting to me, and Paul really liked it. So I was really excited to pick it up. So I went on Thrift Books, and it was still a little bit expensive. I kind of have a threshold of what I'll spend, and it was not below that threshold. So I resisted the temptation originally. And then, if you have bought any books on Thrift Books, maybe you know that you get points, and after a while you get a free book. So I had a free book. This book became available at that price point. They need to be under $7 for the free ones. And this went right under. It was like $6.89, and it's darn near new. Like, I have done a little bit of rumpling to it, and it came with a couple little rumples in it, but you can see it's basically new. And it has great pictures in it, wonderful pictures of David back in the day. It was an incredibly interesting book. It talks about sort of the genesis of all of his creations and the where it all began from. And the first half of the book is like talking about samurai culture and Jules Verne and astronomers and the intersection of birth dates and death dates and their personal stories, and how all of these different influences culminated in this person who became David Bowie and eventually created this amazing rock star character, Ziggy Stardust. So if you are a David Bowie fan, and particularly if you're a fan of that era of his music, which I totally am, you will love this book, and I totally recommend it. And my little happy story about finding it and getting it basically for free, and it being a like new copy, and it all happened right around my birthday last year. It was so cool and made me feel like I was really meant to read this book. So another nonfiction book I would totally recommend. Let's see how long it is. About 330 pages. Such a good read. I will definitely keep this book, although I probably won't read it again, but I'll want to have it on my shelf. I splurged and I bought a new book. This I bought at the beginning of the summer last year, when the going was good, and an editor's adventures during the golden last age of magazines by Graydon Carter. And if you're not familiar, Graydon Carter was the editor of Vanity Fair from, I think, the early 90s for like the next 30 some odd years, during which time I became an avid reader of Vanity Fair. And if you watched my channel last year, you know I'm kind of on this quest to bring back analog living into my life and get away from digital, not have my face in my phone all the time, and bring back the things that I used to enjoy before we were all on our smartphones all the time. And one of the things that I loved from the time of being about 12 on were magazines. I loved magazines so much. I bought multiple magazines every year. I always had a couple of subscriptions. It all began with Young Miss back in the day when it was still digest size. That was in junior high. And in junior high, I became interested in Interview magazine, and then it just went on. I read all of them. The only one I never really liked was Cosmopolitan. But other than that, Vogue, Glamour, Mademoiselle, Elle, I read them all, and I read them really frequently. And Vanity Fair was one that I needed to kind of grow into because it was a little bit more literary, and the topics were more, adult. They weren't like, the best lipstick and how to get those last 5 pounds off. It was cool. And reading this book brought me back to those years of reading magazines, and I'm a sucker for nostalgia. I can eat nostalgia with a spoon to the point of getting melancholy. And this book really scratched that itch. It was very enjoyable, and because of the autobiographical nature of it, I especially enjoyed it. And I've spent very little time on the East Coast of the United States in my life. I was born in Northern California. So things that happen over on the East Coast, and especially in New York City, fascinate me for that reason. And this takes place mostly on the East Coast, mainly in New York, and with a few trips to Europe and stuff. So this was a splurge, and I'm glad I splurged on it. Although now I kind of feel like it's not really a book that I need to keep around. So I have a couple of friends in mind to share this with. And I don't loan my books out. I never loan books out that I will be upset if I don't get back. So I will give this one out hoping that I get it back, but with the knowledge that it may not happen. Okay, and the last nonfiction book I read last year, which is not that exciting to talk about, but it's part of my being a yoga teacher, is Free Your Fascia by Dr. Daniel Fenster. And what I tend to do with books like this is read them so that it gives me kind of new vocabulary and a new way to look at yoga, so that my classes stay fresh. It gives me new things to talk about. Often what I'll find in books like this are the more Western scientific perspective on things that are poetic in the Eastern perspective. And so this gives me a little bit of a framework to make esoteric concepts in yoga a little bit more tangible for the Western mind. And this was a good book for that. And fascia is, all the connective tissue in your body. In classes, I often call it your Spider-Man suit, because it's, it affects how your posture and all that. But your fascia weaves through your entire body. It holds your organs in place. And I was a really not great science student back in school. I really struggled in biology, mostly because I did not like my teacher, but that was not my gift. So books like this are really helpful for me now that I'm a yoga teacher. I really impress upon my students that I'm not a doctor and I'm not a physical therapist, and I stay in my lane, but I do like to know a little bit more. And like I said, this gives me scaffolding to build the really nuanced perspective of yoga on something that feels more accessible to people who aren't really open to the spiritual and the esoteric of yoga, so that my class has broader appeal. And I really liked this book, and it taught me a lot, and I have forgotten a lot of it at this point, but it was a good way to start the year, and I had it finished pretty quickly. This was a morning read. Most of these books were morning reads, except for Graydon Carter. I didn't read that one. I read that one in the evenings. Even Ziggy, I read Ziggy in the morning. So it took me a long time to get through this book. It's pretty dense. The font was pretty small, and the pages are pretty loaded. So, but there's some really good sections of pictures, so that made it go faster. So those are my nonfiction books. I liked all of them. There wasn't one that I wasn't happy that I read. Some of them were more interesting than others. And I've really gotten away from nonfiction books in the last couple of years, as I've tried to get my being an avid reader motor restarted. I've tried to lean back into fiction, and I don't know why, because I really enjoyed all those books. So I'm going to tell you about the other books. How many were there? 7 of those. So I have another 14 to tell you about in my next videos. I'm going to tell you about the fiction that I read. I'm going to tell you about the children's books that I read. And in one of these videos, I'll share with you what I'm reading now. I've had a little trouble getting myself rededicated, refocused on reading. Like I said, I got really burned out in December. Burned out maybe is a little bit too dramatic, but my energy really got sapped and my reserves went really low. And in that time, I just gave myself a break. And if I didn't feel like reading, I didn't. And I even had a DNF book that I started in the fall that I didn't finish because it started to get really depressing. But anyway, I'm kind of feeling myself getting back to it now. I like to have my year start on February 1. My personal new year is February 1. which is midwinter. And for those of you that follow the Wheel of the Year, it's in bulk. And that's kind of my interest. That's a flow that I like to follow. So here we are. Today is 1 week until February 1st. So this is the last kind of not lazy time for me, because I've still been teaching and doing all kinds of stuff, but I haven't really expected myself to get super on board with resolutions and things yet. So I'm starting to find my reading, flow again, and I've got a couple books that I'm getting at least halfway through on. So I'll have some more to tell you in my next video. Anyway, you guys, I hope that your 2026 is off to a really great start. Leave some comments for me. Let me know what you've started reading this year. Let me know what nonfiction books you've read recently that you enjoyed. And if you're new here, I will love it if you would become a subscriber. But mostly what I really like is when you comment, and I'd love to create some more BookTube friendships here. So have a really great rest of your day, my friends, and I'll see you in a couple days when I tell you more about the books that I read last year. Bye-bye for now.